I was found guilty of 3 counts of contempt of court by 2 judges. There was no jury to find me guilty, just 2 appointed judges. As I sat in court, I could not believe what I was hearing. Both judges found me guilty because they believed I breached the reporting restriction on a Muslim child rape gang trial. They also came to the conclusion that photographing Muslim child rapists while asking them questions before they entered court for their verdict created anxiety for the poor Muslim paedophiles. For that, I was to be punished with the full might of the British judicial system. Let me now outline to you what happened in my second trial for contempt of court. The original verdict was appealed due to unfairness.
And allow the appeal against that finding for the detailed reasons set out in the judgment, essentially because the process was flawed.
There were no charges for prejudicing the case or potentially collapsing the trial, as the media continued to push out. They originally tried to bring those charges last year, but they had to remove them as it had been proved in court twice. Nothing I said in my live stream could have prejudiced the jury. One charge was for breaching a reporting restriction, and the other 2 charges were for photographing the defendants when entering court and, according to the judge, aggressively questioning them. Both of these acts, the Attorney General and the government claimed could have made these poor Muslim child rapists feel anxious and therefore not be able to participate in their trial fully. This is despite the fact that the trial was already finished. It was over, so they had nothing to participate in. The trial had finished and the jury had retired to decide the verdict, which all came back as guilty. Let's look at the anxiety charges first and see what I actually said. So I'm at Leeds Crown Court, where these men here, let me see. Right lads, how you feeling? How you feeling about your verdict? How you feeling about your verdict? How you feeling about your verdict?
What verdict?
How you feeling about the verdict? You got your prison bag with you?
Yeah, look at you.
Got your bags with you? You got your bags with you?
Yeah.
How you feeling about the verdict?
Oh, suck your mum's fanny.
Yeah, you got no guilt. Is there any guilt? Is there any guilt, mate? Is there any guilt?
Fucking dad, you son of a bitch.
Hey, mate, how you doing, you alright?
Your wife's a prostitute.
My wife's a prostitute. My wife's a prostitute. How you doing, mate? What are you in court for today, if you don't mind me asking?
I've been seeing your mum.
You've been seeing my mum. Another comment about a woman. What are you in court for, mate? How's the trial gone? How's the trial gone? Yeah, how's the trial gone? How's the trial gone, bro?
I'm the one in court.
You're the one in court, yeah? Why is he carrying your bag then? Anyway. Another comment about your mum. That's every single alleged person who's walked into... Cheers, mate, thanks. Every single alleged person who's walked into court today has made sexual references about women. What's it? Which one? Oh, mate, what are you in court for?
Fuck yourself.
What's that? What are you in court for? Come on, mate.
Why did you just touch him?
This is the verdict. So the trial's ended, the jury are making their mind up, and this is the verdict. This is the verdict today.
2 minutes with yourself.
Are you going to arrest me?
My colleague is going to explain what's going to happen next, right?
Am I being arrested? I am being arrested.
Causing a breach of peace.
I've caused a breach of peace. I'm being arrested.
But the content of what you're
Can we just say
streaming.
The content of what I'm streaming, I'm being arrested for breach of the peace. I'm being arrested for breach of the peace. You've all watched this. You've all watched this. You've all watched this. You've all watched this. Can you get me a solicitor? Can you get me a solicitor?
Can you just turn off your live feed?
Can you get me a solicitor?
Turn off your live feed, please.
Yeah?
Do you understand what I've just said?
No, can you explain it again?
Causing a breach of the peace.
What does that mean? 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 What does that mean?
I've told it from the feed on Facebook.
So to be clear, the questions I actually asked him was the following. All right, lads, how are you feeling? How are you feeling about your verdict? All right, mate, how are you doing? Are you all right? Hello, mate, what are you in court for today? If you don't mind me asking. How's the trial gone, bro? As you can see, I was actually very polite despite some of the disgusting abuse that was thrown my way. By claiming that these questions were in any way aggressive, the judge and the prosecution have simply lied in open court. They've lied in order to back up this ridiculous charge of anxiety. Now, these monsters have been previously kidnapping and raping young children in gangs for years, in full view of everyone, including social services and the police force. They don't sound like the anxious type to me. One of them pushed me in the chest and told me to go fuck myself, when I simply said, "All right, mate, what are you in court for today?" The other 3 child rapist monsters, coincidentally, all made disgusting, vulgar sexual references about female members of my family. But one thing was for sure, none of them looked even remotely anxious.
How are you feeling about the verdict?
Oh, I suck your mum's funny.
You've got no guilt. Is there any guilt?
But according to the Attorney General and the judge, I was aggressive. And in the words of the prosecution, I molested them as they entered the court. Molested them. These are the guys that have molested and raped children for a decade. Is the Attorney General making some kind of sick joke? Now let's quickly take a look at me entering the Old Bailey for my court case.
Tommy Robinson, are you finally going to face justice for potentially collapsing his trial?
I didn't potentially collapse any trial. I'm actually not in charge. I'm not on trial for potentially collapsing a trial. My charge is causing anxiety to the men walking into court by putting cameras and asking them questions. Exactly what you've just done to me is what I face contempt of court for. Exactly this. Do you think this is causing me anxiety? Look at your actions. That's what I'm facing trial for. I didn't act this way. This is a facade. The whole public know that. That's why the public are here to support me. No, I didn't nearly collapse. That's a lie. You're lying. You're lying. I didn't nearly collapse. The judge's words in that case, nothing I said could have caused prejudice to jury. Nothing. That's the judge's words. That's the judge's words. Read the transcript. Do your job as a journalist. Do your job as a journalist.
Were you in contempt of court?
No, I wasn't. That's why I was released from prison. The whole case was unlawful. Now, this is politically motivated persecution by a government who want to silence me. That's what this is.
What do you think about the fact they brought these charges back?
I think it tells everyone the fact. Look at what's happening here. Can you see this? Look, I'm in court for causing them anxiety. Look at all these cameras, look at all these journalists. Yes, that's right. I was on my way into court just like those Muslim child rapists were. Lucy Manning from the BBC blocked my path along with multiple other journalists and media cameramen. She was far more aggressive in her line of questioning, even assuming my guilt, which you're not allowed to do.
Tommy Robinson, are you finally going to face justice for potentially collapsing his trial?
The media swarmed around me with cameras and microphones in my face. In fact, if you look at it, if you look at the press surrounding me in that video, it was 10 times more likely to cause someone anxiety than the polite, soft questions that I asked a Muslim rapist at Leeds Crown Court. Remember, I was completely on my own. Me and my phone. On Thursday, for the first day of my trial, every single newspaper published a picture of me entering court that morning. According to the Attorney General, that is now contempt of court. We played that video in court as evidence, along with many others like Rolf Harris being pretty much crushed by the press on his way into court. However, the judge and the prosecution completely ignored the fact that every other newspaper and journalist questions and photographs defendants entering court every single day across our country. But in my specific case, the Attorney General decided for the first time in British history that when Tommy Robinson politely questioned the now convicted Muslim child rapist, it amounts to contempt of court and could have interfered with the court's proceedings by leaving the defendants in an anxious state of mind. Simply ask them, how are you feeling? I knew the entire system was corrupt when the judge unbelievably agreed with the Attorney General. This has effectively set precedent. Questioning any defendant is contempt of court. Will you ever see another journalist arrested and prosecuted for asking questions or photographing a defendant entering a court? Of course you won't. Of course you won't. Because the Attorney General spent 5 months trying to invent something. Trying to invent something they could fit me up with. And therefore this will be a complete one-off, designed solely to fit up Tommy Robinson. This is a total abuse of power. Now let me address the final charge, breaching of Section 4.2 reporting restriction. Because previously I was ignorant of the rules around contempt of court, I decided to privately pay for media and contempt of court training from Kingsley Napoli, who are one of London's leading law firms. I was keen not to break the law again, and this training taught me all the rules around contempt of court and what I can and can't say, the rules of what I can do. I also downloaded and read the judiciary's own paper called Reporting Restrictions in the Criminal Courts, which is available to download on the judiciary's own website, their website. The Lord Chief Justice himself introduces this report, stating that it's a practical guide for judges and the media on the statutory and common law principles which should be applied with regards to reporting restrictions. If you simply go on Google reporting restrictions in criminal courts, you can read it for yourself. It's the very top link. So let's start with these guidelines on the judiciary's website. Reporting restrictions impose a potential criminal liability on media, editors or journalists, and for that reason, the judiciary's guide lays down specific requirements that the court must follow in the event of a restriction. They must follow. Must! The details of any restriction must be shown on the court listing online, the court screens, and also posted on the doors of the court. Court staff need to respond positively to any request for assistance in relation to the existence of or the specific terms of a restriction if one exists. As you can see from the outline court listings the day before I attended Leeds Crown Court, they mentioned that the jury had retired, but crucially, there was no mention of any reporting restrictions still in place. This led me to think that as the trial had finished and the jury had retired for the verdict, then the restriction may have been lifted. When I turned up to court that morning, I decided to go into court and ask a member of staff if there was still a reporting restriction on the case. As the prosecution witness confirmed in court, he told me he did not know of any reporting restriction on the case and did not provide me with the details of one as is the required in the judiciary's guidelines. My cameraman also went into court and took a picture of the screen and looked at the door to the court, both of which also had no notification of any reporting restriction. The Attorney General, on reading my statement, then tried to disprove it by interviewing the manager of Leeds Crown Court. Unfortunately for the prosecution, she actually confirmed everything I said. In her words, they had failed to adhere to legal guidelines. And in fact, the details of the reporting restrictions were never even uploaded onto the court system at all during the entire trial. The contempt of court law is so out of date it was set before the invention of the internet. The high degree of confusion around guidelines and reporting restrictions led the Law Commission to conduct a 6-month review and recommendation paper back in 2014. The Law Commission found that the rules and guidelines are extremely confusing and could lead to a journalist mistakenly landing in contempt of court. Their sole recommendation from their 6-month review was that the government create one national website that details all of the trials with reporting restrictions placed. This would allow the media, journalists and members of the public access to fully understand what can and cannot be reported on any restricted trials. 5 years on, and they've continued to ignore that recommendation. I'll tell you why they have not followed a completely sensible and extremely easy to implement recommendation. That is because the public would then be able to see the sheer number of these secret Muslim rape gang trials that the government are so desperate to hide. This charge is so laughable that even in the Attorney General's skeleton committal proceedings against me, it referenced a precedent from 1997. It was a case on reporting restrictions against Newspaper Publishing PLC, where it was decided that, and I quote, this is from a precedent, "No one should be in peril of suffering a criminal penalty for contempt unless the order which he is said to have infringed is clear." Even if I breached a supposed order, the fact that Leeds Court admitted to failing to follow up the required notifications on the order or provide any details when I asked that day means they failed in their duty to inform me of any restriction, let alone make the details clear. The crucial point though is that all of this is actually irrelevant. And the prosecutor just used it as a distraction tactics in court because I didn't even breach the reporting order in place on that day. The fact that the trial had come to an end and the failure of the court to notify the public of the existence of an order led to me to believe it was no longer in place. Given how much the government have it in for me, I decided it would still be wise still not to risk breaching one. During my training and studying the judiciary's own guidelines, their own guidelines issued for judges and the media on reporting restrictions, it mentioned one critical point, which I followed to the letter. The crucial piece of law in the judiciary's own guide that was approved by the Lord Chief Justice himself can be found on page 27. The law states, and I quote, Courts have no power under Section 4.2 to prevent publication of material that is already in the public domain. On that day at Leeds Crown Court, I read details of the defendants and their charges from an already published BBC article that is still visible on their website today. It was material that was already in the public domain prior to the reporting restriction, and therefore, according to the judiciary's own guidelines, could not form part of any reporting restriction. I referenced this several times on my live stream and stated that I was only referencing information already in the public domain. I told Judge Marston this instantly. In the original case at Leeds, they failed to make clear any detailed notifications of a reporting restriction on the case, which according to the legal precedent would mean they cannot hold me criminally liable. But crucially, I followed the judiciary's own guidelines, which have been available on their website for the past 4 years and approved by the Lord Chief Justice himself. I only discussed information on that live stream that was already in the public domain. This information could not have been part of a reporting restriction according to the judiciary's own guide. I had paid for training and read pages of documentation on the court's own website to ensure I never fell foul of contempt of court. Do you know what the government lawyer's response to that defence in court? Do you know what he actually said? Unbelievably, he said that the guide to reporting restrictions, which has been published on the judiciary's own website and has a foreword from the Lord Chief Justice himself, was wrong. That's it, he said it was wrong. I couldn't actually believe it. But the prosecution's entire case was that it did not matter that I followed my training, that I spent hours reading and learning the judiciary's guide for reporting restrictions and followed it to the letter. They simply said that the legal guide which I followed from their website was in fact wrong. So I breached the order. My government were going to get an end result no matter what. A prosecution finding me guilty no matter what, and that's what they got. All of the details I've discussed here were raised by my barrister in court. Have you read about any of these points in any of the press reports of my trial? Of course you haven't. It just highlights how corrupt the entire system is and how the mainstream media are just propaganda puppets for the governing establishment. Last year, Leeds Court broke every single legal procedure possible. They refused me my own legal representation, did not even tell me what I was accused of doing, did not ask me to plead guilty or not guilty. Instead of letting me speak, they sentenced me to 13 months prison in a 10-minute trial, something you could imagine being held in North Korea. It was rightly thrown out on appeal after I had already spent nearly 3 months in solitary confinement. Judge Marston decided that day that I needed to be immediately removed from the street and sent to prison within minutes. The Muslim child rapist with 16 witness statements detailing the rape and torture of many children he deemed were no risk to the public and provide them with bail so they could continue to walk the streets alongside mine and your children. One of those monsters decided to do a runner the week before the case finished, and it's believed he is still hiding in Pakistan. That dangerous child rapist monster was on the run for months before the reporting restriction was lifted. This meant the press could not even tell the public or warn them or appeal for witnesses or try and find out his whereabouts. The government's #1 priority, first and foremost, is to ensure the safety of the British people. But it appears the need to suppress the scale of these gang rapes across the country trumps everything else. This scumbag rapist is still free and to this very day evaded justice thanks to Judge Marston. Do you know that no one in over 60 years has ever been in prison for a publication reporting breach? The judiciary's reporting restriction guidelines do not even mention prison. They reference the possibility of unlimited fines for journalists. Rod Liddell breached the reporting restriction in the Stephen Lawrence murder trial, detailing the defendant's previous criminal record, which risked collapsing the entire murder trial. He weren't even prosecuted. Instead, the magazine he wrote the article for was fined £3,000. Journalists at the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror both published prejudicial information on the Levi Bellyfield murder of Millie Dowler. It was so prejudicial that it collapsed the entire case. The jury had to be discharged. The journalists themselves were never prosecuted. Instead, the Daily Mirror and the Daily Mail were fined £10,000 for collapsing the entire murder trial. They actually robbed one of the victims of justice. A total penalty of £10,000. You couldn't make it up. I spent 3 months on solitary confinement already. They want to send me back to jail. This year, Arif Ansari, the editor for the BBC Asian Network, committed the most significant publication breach possible by revealing the identity of a child victim and witness in the Rotherham grooming gang trial. He done it live on air. Child sexual victims are afforded complete anonymity. in the legal system for obvious reasons. I've personally spoken with this poor girl, and after the editor of the BBC Asian Network shared her identity on air, as a consequence, she was subjected to vile threats and intimidation by family and friends of these Muslim child rape monsters. The BBC were forced to make a payout in compensation to her to try and smooth it over. Arif was taken to court this year, but a judge decided he was not guilty of contempt. Although it caused this unfortunate child rape victim further trauma, it was just a mistake, according to the judge. Not guilty, according to the judge. £3,000 fine for risking the Stephen Lawrence murder trial. £10,000 penalty for collapsing an entire murder trial, and a not guilty for revealing a child rape victim's identity live on air, resulting in death threats. Now you can watch on Thursday when the corrupt British establishment will almost certainly try to send me to prison for the second time and make me the only person ever to be in prison for a publication reporting breach, despite not actually even breaching it according to their own guidelines. It has been proven in court twice that what I said could not have prejudiced the trial. The monsters were convicted and the case finished months ago. Look at these other more severe breaches which receive small fines or nothing at all, and then ask yourself why I received a 13-month prison sentence in a kangaroo court back in Leeds. That is because the British state's politically motivated attempt at shutting down dissident voices and generally trying to have me killed by Muslim gangs in prison. There can be no other reason why they moved me out of the complete safety in HMP Hull and onto the wing of the highest populated Muslim CCAT prison in the country. If a defendant is accused of a crime which could land them in prison for greater than 6 months, it is the law that he or she should stand in front of a jury of their peers to ensure fair justice. This contempt of court charge holds a 2-year prison sentence, yet they're refusing me a jury of my peers because they know full well that 12 ordinary people would throw this crock of shit straight out. This is a backdoor way that the Attorney General and the government can effectively sentence me to death in prison by bypassing a trial by jury. Even people who don't agree with my political views must be able to see how unbelievably corrupt this entire process is. The fact that the judges heard all of this in court and still came back within minutes to find me guilty of all 3 charges makes a complete embarrassment of the British legal system, which was once respected across the world. The fact that the government do not care how bent and corrupt this looks is even more worrying. The establishment has betrayed democracy on Brexit. Everyone needs to wake up and realise we're run by a handful of elites who are all connected and actually do not give a damn what the people actually want or vote for. They do not care that the British justice system looks like an absolute joke across the world. All they care about is getting what they want. We are run by nothing more than a globalist dictatorship. The British establishment spends its time virtue signalling about big bad Russia and China, stating that they have appalling human rights and are clamping down on free speech. You are the biggest bunch of hypocrites to walk this earth. The traitors that are running this country have destroyed it. They are removing our fundamental freedoms step by step, every single day. There are Islamic terrorists already serving 30 years in prison for being caught with guns, knives, IEDs. They were on their way to murder me. The British state has issued me with 9 Osman warnings, informing me that they have credible intelligence that Islamic extremists or far left extremists are plotting to murder me, my family. Despite this, they refuse to provide me any details of that intelligence and inform me that I cannot take steps to protect myself. If you have watched this video, you can see this is a complete sham prosecution. My legal team will look to appeal as soon as we have received the written judgment next week. This persecution has already cost over £115,000 in legal fees, and the cost will continue to escalate. I need to try and lodge an appeal so that they do not effectively work towards having me killed in prison. You can help support me towards these costs at tommyappeal.com. I can't thank those who have contributed enough and will be eternally grateful. I am Stephen Yaxley Lennon, but we are all Tommy Robinson. Never ever surrender yourselves to the enemies of free speech.